But yeah, thank you so much. Welcome, everyone. So welcome to our talk, Crystals and Credibility, Success in the Mineral World with Luke Timberlake. So I'm really pleased to be joined by Luke from Salt Shack. And I just thought I'd open up with a bit of introduction on kind of who we are and what we'll be doing today. So I'm Shanice McBean. I'm the founder of Next Gen Mineral Collectors, and Next Gen is a UK-based mineral collecting club for young mineral collectors and our supporters. And for those of you who are in the collecting community, you'll know that young means probably under 50. So most of our members are between 18 and kind of 45 years old. And we host monthly webinars, basically getting UK kind of mineral experts and dealers and collectors together to talk minerals. So this is maybe the eighth talk that we've done. So really, really pleased to be joined by Luke. I'm Shanice. You might know me also as Beans Fluorite on Instagram, where I catalogue my English fluorite collection. And I'm really pleased to be joined today by Luke. So Luke, I'll let you introduce yourself. I'm sure you could do a better intro than I can. So tell us
Oh,
who
I
you
don't know.
are.
Hi everyone. So my name is Luke. If you are familiar with Salt Shack, so we're an educational mineral science company. We're an e-commerce as well, and we run a shop in Stony Stratford, sort of just on the periphery of Milton Keynes, which is about a year old now. The biggest part of my job, I think, is probably teaching people about crystals and minerals. And the reason as to why I did that is purely because I love to understand things and I can't stand it when people ask me questions that I don't know the answer to. So when we started selling crystals and minerals, which I assume the genesis of that we're probably going to get into at some
Yeah.
point, I wanted to understand my product and I wanted to understand it intimately. And that just sort of that snowballed into us running an educational sort of brand, if you will.
So let's go way back then.
Yeah.
Well, actually, I don't know how way back. I think we're around the same age, mid 30s ish.
I'm late 30s. I'm 37. I'm nearly 38. So
Okay, all
yeah.
right. So you're 5 years older than me. So we're in the similar kind of ballpark.
Yeah.
What's your first memory of being captivated by minerals? Where did it all start for you?
See, I've told this story probably more times than I can even count now, and probably the audience that are familiar with me are probably sick of me telling it. So I was 8 or 9. I don't know. When things go back this far, it's difficult to pinpoint
Yeah.
exactly how old you were, but I was taken on a school trip to the Natural History Museum. And we were sort of ferried around by someone who, in retrospect, probably wasn't much older than a teenager. And I remember a geode being cracked open in front of me, and I was kind of off to the races from that point onwards. Now, people were probably sick of me saying this as well, but I mean, I've got ADHD, so I tend to hyper focus on different things. And I've gone through stages throughout my life where I've hyper focused on different things. So I'll hyper focus on minerals, I'll hyper focus on history, I'll hyper focus on various different subjects. Now, I had a sort of a fair understanding of crystals and minerals because I had that interest in the background, but I think it sort of sat there dormant for a very long time until I kind of fell into the crystal and mineral industry more or less by accident.
So what was the actual accident that took place then?
So we, so if someone was asked 10 years ago that I would be selling crystals and minerals for a living, it would have probably struck them as being very odd because I don't think anyone that knew me a very long time ago would have predicted that was the trajectory of my career. So we landed in this very much by accident. So when my son was born, I was a personal trainer and I had been for about 10 years, about a decade, I'd been a PT for. So I'd been teaching people about nutritional science. I was a diabetic specialist. I was a GP referral personal trainer. And when our son was born, we had no kind of prenatal diagnosis. Obviously, Danielle was pregnant. We were acutely aware of that. But we had no prior warning as to the nature of his disability. And for anyone that doesn't have any context there, so my son has Down syndrome, which is not really a real problem. It was the sort of things that were on the periphery which
Mm.
caused real issues. So His eyesight was deteriorating, his hearing is deteriorating, as it still is deteriorating. But he was also born with a heart condition, which is fairly typical of children with Down syndrome. So he was born with a condition called atrioventricular septal defect, so which is, in layman's terms, just holes on the heart. And so he needed surgery fairly early on for that. That was extraordinarily stressful. And then further down the line, he was diagnosed with a disease which has nothing to do with Down syndrome. It was just plum luck. And this was much more severe. It was something called long segment tracheal stenosis. Now, when Tristan was born, I struggled with it tremendously. Obviously, when you haven't got that time to kind of acclimate to the fact that you're going to have a disabled child, you there's a period of mourning where you're kind of mourning
Mm.
the child that you imagined that you were going to have. So I struggled with this immensely. I started to struggle at work. I did ultimately end up having to leave my job for various reasons, mainly because we were kind of acting like roadie for Tristan, pivoting from one hospital to another. And this left us in the politest possible way kind of destitute. So we didn't really
Mm.
have any money at all. So when Tristan had the most made, bearing in mind he's had about 23 different surgeries, I think, and I might even be lowballing that, it might be more than that. So when he had his major surgery, which is basically to more or less replace his airway at Great Ormond Street, we essentially had to uproot our lives. We had to move to London, just me and Danielle. And bearing in mind, we had a daughter by this point as well. So my daughter had to live with my sister for the best part of a year. And we had no income whatsoever, living in arguably one of the most expensive cities in the industrialized world, on no income whatsoever. So we were living off of a GoFundMe page. And Danielle, being definitely the most industrious out of the two of us, she started selling salt lamps online. And I
Right.
didn't really know what salt lamps were at the time. And Danielle has this thing where she kind of jumps from fascination to fascination. And I just assumed pessimistically that it wasn't going to last. And it ended up doing quite well. So she was doing this just to kind of make ends meet. It was something that she could do in hospital corridors when she was going and seeing ENTs and physiotherapists and what we waiting in waiting rooms in hospitals, basically, something that she could do to give herself a bit of dignity, if nothing else. And then I started helping progressively more and more. I'm still a personal trainer, kind of. Like I was a self-employed PT. I still had a handful of clients that I was seeing in the background. So I was still kind of employed, but not very well. And then uh, this salt lamp thing started taking off, and I started helping progressively more. To start off with, in more of a physical capacity, because salt lamps are very heavy, and when you've got a lot of them in an old Toyota, I was sort of physically lugging them back and forth in and out of the car. Then I
Yeah, I can
started
imagine the
helping.
big guns would be helpful in that context.
Yeah, I suppose so. I mean, I suppose they were kind of weaponizing me, really. I mean, Danielle started the business with a friend of hers who kind of backed out gradually for sort of personal reasons. And then, as Danielle's friend kind of backed out of the business, I started taking more of a role in the business. So I sort of latched onto it. And, it was very small scale. We started off doing things like school fetes and fairs and things like this. And, this kind of increased in sort of scale to the point that we ultimately ended up getting like a mobile retail unit in Milton
Right, yeah.
Keynes town centre. And this was a massive risk for us because this is very expensive. Bearing in mind, we had no real meaningful amounts of money. And this was like £5,000 a month, this RMU in Milton Keynes. And luckily, that did really well. And we noticed that there was a correlation between people who were buying salt lamps, were talking to us a lot about crystals. It was a similar sort of community. And we noticed as well that a lot of the places that we were sourcing these salt lamps from were also selling crystals. So
Right.
it was quite an easy pivot from one to the other. So it was kind of the realization from Danielle and my perspective that salt lamps were probably going to be a bit of a fad in the sense that they were going to sort of peak and valley in terms of their popularity. So as a means of insulating ourselves against that, we started selling crystals, and they were quite easy to get because the people who were selling us salt lamps were also selling these crystals. So we started incrementally introducing them, and then before long, we weren't really selling salt lamps anymore. We were selling crystals. So
Yeah.
it all happened quite organically and kind of by accident.
So I was going to ask you if in your kind of early business, you had kind of mentors and role models you looked up to, but actually, it just sounds like it was Danielle.
Yeah, kind of. I mean, there were some people that sort of latched on in the beginning. I mean, weirdly enough, interestingly, some suppliers actually. I mean, there is one supplier who I'm still very good friends with now. For example, I see him a few times a year, and you might even be familiar with him. You know, he comes around in sort of like I call him like the ice cream man of minerals. He comes around in his van about 3 or 4 times a year, and he was very well read in terms of crystals. He started supplying us fairly early on, and because he had this really sort of erudite attitude towards minerals, that he was very, very, very well read in terms of the things that he was selling. And I think I kind of envied that. So I think you could, Danielle, certainly in terms of her motivation and her
Yeah.
drive, was certainly a role model. I'm still very proud of her for that. But there were people in the background that I sort of aspired to replicate or imitate, or at least be on the same level as, so that I could maintain a conversation with them.
And it seems like since then you've really picked up on maybe that more educational side of minerals as a business. But before we get on to that, I did want to ask you about that. But before, were there kind of real early challenges that you had to overcome, kind of setting up a mineral business, not necessarily having the most experience in the industry? What were those early challenges?
So the early challenges for me were kind of ethical ones, because so I'll give you an example. So this is even before the RMU. So this is before we started the stand in Milton Keynes Shopping Centre. We started with crystals in a very small way. I think for every collector and for every seller, I think tumblestones are kind of like a bit of a gateway drug. We started with tumblestones. 90% of our stock was all still salt lamps, and then I, for a period of time, worked in a David Lloyd, in the sort of the nightclub, not
Mm.
nightclubs, the clubs, for example. And they did these events sort of periodically where artisans from all over the community would come, and they'd set up wallpapering tables and things. And they allowed us to do these events, right? So me and Danielle would turn up. And we've only just started selling crystals. And we've ordered these crystals domestically. We've ordered them from a British wholesaler, and they turn up with these cards, right? And these cards, and I didn't know anything about metaphysics. I didn't know anything about crystal healing. At this point, I didn't really know very much about crystals. So I'm in what is essentially a health club behind a wallpapering table with sort of a kind of a crude display of tumblestones. And I remember, and I've got lots of examples like this, but this one sticks out in my mind. I had a lady who'd come out of what I assume was a yoga class, very sort of affable, quite heavy set woman. And she was talking to me about all of her health conditions. Now, bearing in mind, my background is health and fitness, so I'm very used to talking to people in this way. And she's saying I've got diabetes and I'm a diabetic specialist. So she's saying I've got anxiety, I've got depression. She's reeling off all of these things that she's got wrong with her. And bearing in mind, I'm someone stood behind a wallpapering table with a bunch of tumblestones, and I'm wondering why she's asking me these things. And about sort of before she's sort of climaxed with this monologue of things that she's got wrong with her, I'm like, in a minute you're going to ask me for some kind of diagnosis, aren't you? But in the context of crystals. And she wound down and she said exactly what I expected her to say. She said, "What would you recommend?" Obviously in the context of crystals. And I said, "Go and see your bloody doctor." It made me, it was the sort of kind of come to Jesus moment where I realized, hang on, I'm probably going to be exposed to some questions here that are going to make me kind of uncomfortable. So this was a period of where, before we were an educational company, I was selling crystals. They were turning up with these cards, which were sort of for display purposes, like for love and anxiety, things that I virulently didn't agree with. But so I spent a period of time trying to distance myself from what the questions that people were asking. So they would say, "What's this good for?" So I would sleep better at night by saying, "Well, they're not going to do anything, but this is what they mean." So I kind of framed them as like being sort of a Clinton's card sort of thing. And that's how I sort of reconciled it at first. And then it kind of mutated from there. I got very sick of doing that. So I thought, I'm not going to do this anymore. We're going to start talking about the mineral science.
Right, I see how that connection happened then. So I guess just before we pivot away from your kind of early career in the industry, if you were to give advice, maybe your top tip for people who are just starting out in the hobby or just starting out in the business, from your experience, what would that kind of number one thing be?
If you're starting out in the hobby, I'm going to give you the same advice that I give everyone: skip polished and go right to raw, because that's where you're going to end up anyway. So if you're starting as a new mineral collector, it's like I said earlier, tumblestones are a gateway drug, and then it sort of evolves and mutates into sort of slightly larger polished items. These polished items get progressively more elaborate, and then all of a sudden they all end up on eBay, and you end up swapping them out for raw items. So because the trajectory is going to ultimately end you up in raw, I would say if you're starting out as a mineral collector, start collecting raw items, because 99.9% of the time you're going to end up there anyway. In terms of business advice that I would give you, get out of the habit of assuming that everything that you do needs to make money. Start doing things for free. And I know this might sound really counterintuitive, because obviously you're running a business, it needs to make money, but also at the same time, you need exposure, you need to be giving something to the community, and you can't be seen to be giving something to the community or your audience or your prospective buyers if everything you're doing has this need for money. Contribute something to the community for nothing. Give some time, give some energy to delivering something with no expectation of return. At least that will get you seen.
So just on that then, and I'm going to do something very British now, and going to pour myself another cup of tea. But while I'm doing that, let's get into thinking about kind of the mineral industry more generally then. So you were talking about polished specimens, and obviously there's a debate around what kind of interventions when you're selling crystals are acceptable, and which ones are not. So what are your top red flags for fake or enhanced specimens, and how would you advise someone scam proofs their collection? And I'm just going to say, I don't think polishing is a scam, but obviously there's different styles of intervention, aren't there?
Well, so when you say intervention, so sort of means of insulating yourself from sort of fakes and replicas and dyes and things like this. Is this the
Yeah, so any kind of, like, I guess, enhancements, or there's a debate around how much can you meddle with a specimen before you sell it. You can clean it, you
Oh,
can
I
trim it,
don't
you know.
know. I don't know. So I mean, I have absolutely no problem with someone cleaning something. That I have absolutely no problem with that whatsoever. It's a very big question, because there's so much diversity to it. So we're in the process at the moment of writing a book on fake minerals, and even the term fake is a controversial term. Fake, replica, synthetic, enhanced,
Yeah.
dyed. There's so much nuance to this, and it's such a broad subject, making it a very difficult question to answer in sort of like a summarization. Um, with everything, I would say approach everything with a degree of skepticism. Always carry, if you're buying things online, this is make sure that you are buying from a reputable dealership. Always avoid these very large e-commerces like Temu and things like this, because this is a bit of an issue in the industry. This is, and I mean this with the least amount of prejudice possible. China is a bit of an issue. Chinese goods are the biggest culprits that I see for sort of dyed, enhanced, treated, mischaracterized, mislabeled things coming onto the market. And obviously, when you've got very large companies on TikTok and things like that, which are hailing from China, it does cause a little bit of an issue, because it's essentially being flooded into the industry. So it's a very difficult question to answer, because there's so much diversity to it.
So what things should people look out for? What kind of physical signs should people look out for maybe
So
something that's been enhanced,
repairs,
but Yeah, not declared.
Repairs is a good one. I mean, thing always carry a UV light with you. I mean, this is difficult when it comes to buying things online because if obviously if you're buying something online, it can be quite tricky to inspect things in the way that you would do if you were at a show, for example. I mean, you and me at Bakewell, for example, the other day, it's very easy for you and me to pull out an ultraviolet
Yeah.
light and see whether or not something's been repaired. That's not necessarily as easy online. You can usually find out in the retrospect whether or not you've got a damaged or repaired specimen. But by that time, you've already parted with money. So it's a little bit of an issue. I would say when you are starting out as a collector, in order to better sort of acquaint yourself with what is real and what is spurious, is to perhaps consider collecting from things like shows. I mean, Bakewell was a very good example, but you've got the Sussex show. I mean, you'll have shows all over the world, for example, if we've got an international audience. But I would say buy things face to face, inspect them, make sure you talk to your dealer, ask them probing questions about that specimen and see how they answer them. An ultraviolet light is always very helpful. Look for things like assemblages, look for damage that's been repaired or glued back together. I think that, or in, I think the golden rule as well in the industry, and I don't think you're going to disagree with me here, is if it's too good to be true, it absolutely will be.
I think as well, and just to add on to that, we can touch on this when we talk about social media a little bit later. That is 100% true, but it's also the case that sometimes people don't know what they have, and that's
Yeah,
where the kind of educational content is so important because when you're educated and you know what you're looking for, whether that's in a particular locality or a particular species, and then you spot something that the seller maybe doesn't know they have. A big one for me is I collect English fluorite, and there's
yeah,
a locality called Rotherham Fell that's really rare.
yeah,
And Jesse Fisher wrote a brilliant academic article on like how to spot the clues that you might have a Rotherham Fell fluorite. And sometimes people just don't know what they have. But yeah, you're
yeah,
right. Majority of the time, if it looks too good to be true, it probably is. And
yeah,
just on that, pricing. So this is something I've been very, very curious about.
yeah.
What is the difference and how does a dealer decide what is a £50 specimen and what is a £5,000 specimen? Because obviously, minerals don't have an intrinsic value. They
No,
get value, from the mining process and having to pay your workers, or you know, they get value from what people will pay for them. But how do you as a dealer decide how
it,
to price things?
it depends. It depends on whether or not you're buying sort of an individual specimen, because obviously we have to source things. We source things internationally. Generally, what we tend to do is we tend to buy things in bulk.
Right.
So I mean, most dealerships, and I don't think this is controversial to say, because I think this is more or less the sort of one of the foundations of mercantilism is that most people tend to operate on about 50% margin. Now, obviously, there's going to be a great deal of nuance to this, especially in minerals when you're buying individual specimens, for example. So you're looking for things like the absence of damage, aesthetic features that your audience are going to be that are going to seem quite marketable. But generally, I operate on about 50% margin.
Yep.
And that sounds like a lot. And anyone without context is going to hear that and think, oh my goodness, that's a lot of money. When you factor in things like VAT, corporation tax, utilities, and everything that actually goes into that, shipping, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, it's not actually a great deal of money. With pricing more broadly, I would say it's a qualitative thing. It's the absence of damage, aesthetic features, the rarity of the item. And I know the term rare is thrown around in the industry perhaps more than it should be. But yeah, it's a combination of different factors that kind of coalesce.
So you mentioned kind of aesthetics and lack of damage, and that is actually a really good segue to a slightly more philosophical question that I wanted to ask you. And I know when I
I love
mentioned
this.
this at Bakewell, you were so giddy. You were like, "Yeah, philosophy," um, which is great. I studied philosophy at uni, so I
I
also,
know
I
you
also,
did.
yeah.
I've had hour-long conversations with you.
Yeah, I remember that, and yeah, it was a great day at the Crystal Classics showroom. So,
Yeah.
the question that I wanted to ask you is, I would say maybe there's been a philosophical shift in the community, or at least a certain type of philosophy around collecting has become more dominant, and that's towards the idea that minerals are art forms of art.
Yeah.
And I guess the kind of mineral collecting community is coalescing around a very specific kind of aesthetic where you have contrast in texture and color, or you have a focal crystal, or lack of damage, transparency, gemminess, all of this stuff. And it kind of means that when you look at the top end collections, they all look quite similar, which for me
Mhm.
is the opposite of art. Art is about innovation and expression.
Yeah.
So what do you make about what do you think about the direction that the top end collecting community is going in? And yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
I'm not going to lie to you. I don't really think I've got too many strong opinions on that, really, to be fair. I mean, it's an odd question because I've never really heard it framed that way before. I mean, I would certainly agree that that minerals are sort of, I can see how someone would rationalize it as being art, but it's a difficult question for me to answer. I really I don't think I think you've stumped me on that one. I don't really think I've got an answer for that one. So
No, fair enough.
this is the trap that I knew that I was going to fall into with you because I know that you're very philosophically inclined, and I really don't think I've got an answer for that, to be honest with you.
So do you think there is maybe one ideal aesthetic, or should we be embracing different types of aesthetic minerals?
It depends on the collector. I mean, it's different horses for different courses, isn't it? I mean, if we treat collectors as if they are a collective, as opposed to a group of individuals who have their own idiosyncrasies and inclinations, if we try and ballpark it into sort of, we're making it a little bit too generic. I mean, I know people that only collect zeolites. I know people that only collect fluorites. I know people that only collect wolfenites, for example. I know people that collect type localities. And I don't think this is necessarily an extension of a broader philosophical sort of perception. I think this is a case, I think this is what makes mineral collecting quite interesting, is the fact that we all collect in our own specific way. So when you've got people who collect type localities, for example, they're very, very, very anal about where those items come from. It has to be the item where that item was first described. And some people are really, really neurotic about that. And then you've got people whose entire collection will only consist of things like wolfenite, for
Yeah.
example. So I think it's more an extension of, and I think in a lot of ways there's a poetry to this. There is a beauty to this, that it's an extension of you as being a human being. I think that's actually quite lovely.
Yeah.
I think it's very difficult to put collectors into this sort of like to generalize in the way that we probably would want to make it easier to wrap our heads around, because I think the things that we collect are an extension of us as human beings, as individuals, as personalities.
Yeah, and there is like almost a psychology to collecting, isn't it? It's quite a neurotic
Yeah,
hobby, where you amass things like lots of the same thing in one place. But I
yeah,
guess everyone's collection does say something quite specific about them, whether,
yeah.
they're really attracted to beauty or science or a particular connection to a locality. So I really like that poetry you spoke of, definitely.
I mean, I've got my own theories about it. I don't think this is controversial. I mean, I have noticed a correlation between, and I've had this conversation with a lot of people. Um, I've noticed a correlation between collecting and neurodiversity. And my theory about this is the fact that no, I'm neurodivergent. I have ADHD, and I can be quite socially awkward because the kind of things that appeal to the average sort of neurotypical person um, don't interest me in the slightest. So it's very, very difficult for me to have an in terms of conversation in the politest possible way. I couldn't give a damn about football. I couldn't give a damn about cars, which is generally the sort of the language that sort of other men tend to speak. So when you have sort of the kind of social awkwardness that can come with being sort of neurodiverse, is you like to have icebreakers, and I don't think there's any such. I don't think that there is a better icebreaker than show and tell.
Yeah,
It kind
yeah.
of gives you an opportunity to sort of slide your way unlubricated into a conversation by saying, here, look at me. And it gives you an opportunity to segue into something that you're quite interested in, to actually feel immersed in a conversation that you'd otherwise be ostracized from.
Yeah, no, I really, really relate to that. I was at a friend's house yesterday. It was a group of people, and I can also be a bit socially awkward and kind of mostly prefer to just, be in my room with my rocks.
Yeah.
Um, but people asked, oh, how you doing? What's up? And I was like, oh, I don't like flying, but I'm preparing to go on a plane next week. I'm going to Munich. And then it's like a whole 15 minutes that I get to tell the group about why I'm going to Munich. Hey, look at my Instagram.
Yeah.
And yeah, you get to strike up these conversations with people through your passion. And yeah, I love those moments.
Yeah,
They're
so do
really, really
I.
great.
Yeah, I think it's one of the things that I enjoy most about running the shop. It's the enjoyment that you elicit from seeing people interact with minerals for perhaps
Yeah.
the first time, and that opportunity to sort of like, really, really sort of project your enthusiasm onto people in an environment where it's kind of okay.
Yeah,
If
they've
I
come into your shop, so
Yeah, you're like, you're mine now.
yeah.
You belong to me. For the time that you're in here, I'm going to talk to you about whatever I want. But because you're enthusiastic about it, I find it kind of what's the way of putting this? It people latch onto that. They latch onto that enthusiasm, and because you're so enthused by it, they all of a sudden, like I've always said, that I would rather create a collector than pander to existing ones.
Yeah.
And there's something about that I find really exciting, especially with the younger generation.
So let's talk about the shop then, because Salt Shack has a huge social media following, but also has a shop on a British high street. And many dealers have actually moved their businesses to be primarily online, whereas you've got this more hybrid business model. So is the
Yeah.
mineral shop a relic of a bygone era, or are modern mineral dealers really missing a trick with the shop?
See, I knew you were going to ask me this, and I've thought about this quite a lot actually. In since you told me, so for anyone in the audience, I knew some of the questions in advance, and
Not
I've
all of
thought
them.
about this one a great deal. And I would be inclined to agree that if you are an aspiring crystal mineral merchant, etc., and you're looking to sort of make edgeways into the marketplace, I wouldn't start with a shop. Good God, no, I wouldn't start with a shop. I don't think it would be easy. I'm not going to say it's impossible, but I'm not going to say it's easy to run only a shop. I don't, and this is not just the mineral industry anymore. I mean, this is every industry now. So there's just not enough revenue there. I mean, you'll do very well. You'll do very well at Christmas. You'll do very well at Valentine's Day. But if you don't have that social media following, driving people into the shop, I don't know how people would keep going. I honestly don't. We have that luxury of obviously having established ourselves on social media in advance, and we have quite a large international following. So, and because we're, reasonable reasonable distance away from London, within, it doesn't take that long to get from London, which is where most tourists tend to go. If you're coming from America or Canada or Australia, you're going to London, aren't you, really? Or at least that's where you're going to start off. So it's not much of an inconvenience for people to sort of segue to us, just to come and see us and just to spend some time in the shop. And that makes up maybe 15% of the business that we do in the shop is people literally making the effort to travel
Yeah.
to us because they know us from social media. And if that wasn't there, I would consider it probably to be quite difficult. Most of our business, even in the shop, I can do more money in a phone call at the end of the day with a collector or two collectors than I will have made in the shop that day. So I think that retail in general, I think is going to struggle without a big online following. And we've structured this in a slightly different way. I mean, obviously, we're an educational mineral science company, and I've looked at retail and how retail is doing, and it's doing abysmally post COVID. So you look at the services industry. In contrast to this, the services industry is doing fine. For context, I've got a shop, and when I moved into this shop, the shops either side were empty; they were both vacant. And now both of the places, they're both occupied now, but they're both service industry, right? Which says a lot for the trajectory of the high street. Okay,
Yeah.
so we've tried to basically make a crystal shop that more resembles the service industry than resembles retail. So we've tried to create sort of an experience where people go in there to learn something, and
Right.
generally as a byproduct of that, they'll buy something. So it's the service industry with trappings of retail, as opposed to it just being retail, if that makes sense.
So you're giving your customers something, you're not just taking from them. There is something that you walk into the shop for that is unique that you can't get online and just kind of scrolling through your website.
Um, no, I mean everything that we've got in the shop would be available online. It's not really so much that. It's so I'll give an example. So apart from things like tumblestones, because I can't be bothered to talk about tumblestones over and over and over again. But with things that are on the shelves, things for the most part aren't labeled. You know,
Right.
I posted about this a while ago, and
Yeah,
I
you got
remember.
in big trouble, didn't you?
No. I mean, I even had Jolien Ralph who messaged me about that, and I was it was my first encounter with Jolien actually, and he was like, I kind of agree with you. So the reason as to why I do this is because I think that over labeling stifles conversation. Now, if
Right.
you think of it from my perspective, I am someone who wants there to be curiosity. Education is an extension of curiosity. You don't seek an education unless you're curious. If you're not interested in a particular subject, you're not going to seek out education in it. So I think that the crystals in and of themselves are beautiful enough to draw people into the shop, but I want people to be curious about them. And I think over labeling stifles conversation. And as soon as you have an opportunity to have that conversation and you have that opportunity to teach, that's the genesis of that passion and enthusiasm.
Yeah, I
That's
can
when
see
you
that. I
can
can see the
capture people's
value in that.
imagination.
I guess the difference with having a shop and being online is that you're in person, so you can build a relationship with someone. And actually,
Yeah.
if you just want to know the locality of a piece, you can kind of look at that up anywhere.
Yeah, yeah.
So you have this hybrid model where you've got the shop and where you've got social media, and you've recently hit, is it 311,000 followers on
300,
Facebook?
yeah, 311,000. Yeah, so that was
Which
good.
is kind of insane. So for
Yeah.
my benefit and everyone else's benefit, how on earth do you do that? Especially
All
with a
right.
topic like minerals, which is,
So
not
we
that
kind
sexy.
of we kind so creating content is the love of my life and the bane of my life simultaneously. Okay, so I'm a little bit obsessive compulsive in the sense that I post. You might not necessarily see 24 posts a day, but that's what I post.
Wow,
So
yeah.
I post every hour of the day, 5 days a week. I used to do it 7. I don't do it on Saturday, Sunday anymore because it was just taking over my life. So I noticed a correlation between consistency a couple of years ago. So we kind of abandoned Facebook for a long time. So we during COVID we started on Facebook. That's when we started doing live videos, and we did very well there. And I think the correlation between us doing well was the fact that I was just horrifically drunk all the way through the live videos. So we would do these live videos that was just me sort of falling around, and I think that kind of appealed to people, gave people a sense of community. We did that for I don't know about a year or two, and then all of a sudden Facebook's live function just became abysmal just overnight. So there were these massive lags. They were the live videos would just be just unsustainable. The quality of the live was terrible. So we kind of pivoted to TikTok, and we did very well there. And TikTok was a platform that I never said that I was going to participate in because my opinion of TikTok still is that it ruins people's attention spans. But at this exact point, it was only like 30-second videos. So what we transitioned onto TikTok at the point when Facebook live videos were terrible. They just become terrible. So they just extended from about 30-second maximum videos up to about 3 minutes. So I'm like, all right, I can squeeze some educational content in there. So although we weren't going live there, the content that I was uploading semi regularly started doing quite well. So
Right.
we started doing live videos there, and then we kind of abandoned Facebook purely because I think it got my back up so much how bad the quality of the lives were. And by this point, we weren't really uploading a great deal of educational content. We were uploading essays, maybe 1 out of every 10 pieces of content that I would upload would land on Facebook. And then it was about Christmas 2 or 3 years ago when for some reason my videos started doing really well. And this is an algorithmic thing. I couldn't wrap my head around why they all of a sudden started doing really well. But I just started maybe getting addicted to the fact that these videos are doing really well, triggering the dopamine center of my brain. Maybe I just loved the attention. So I kept posting it. And I noticed this correlation between consistency and traffic. So I would just this has got sort of increased and increased and increased to the point that it became almost absurd. Where I would post every hour of every day, so it would be some kind of educational photo, maybe a game, maybe a test. So it was really just consistency with that. I think that's kind of, and where we've started to partner and we've started to collaborate with lots of dealerships. I've got a big, massive thank you to extend to characters like Gail Coper Span and Jim
Yeah.
Span, who saw that we were doing educational content and saw that we weren't doing the sort of metaphysical side of things. And that I think appealed to Gail fairly early on. She started sending me videos of marvelous pieces that I could have never afforded in a million years. So I all of a sudden had an opportunity to dangle really aesthetic things in front of people and narrate over the top.
Yeah.
And obviously, this convergence of educational material with really aesthetic minerals kind of kept people's attention. And social media is just keeping people's attention. The longer you can keep it, the more social media is going to project you out to a wider audience.
So just on that, so I've got this, which you might recognize.
Yes, somebody I know wrote it. Yes,
Yeah, which is obviously the opposite of social media. It's a book.
yes,
So I just wanted to ask you about this because writing a book in this day and age, and especially a book about minerals, is quite a bold project. And I
yeah,
think what I really admire about you doing this is that you're an autodidact. So,
yeah.
a lot of this is you having educated yourself about geology and mineralogy, and you've decided to share that with the world, and it's been hugely successful. But I guess my question is, why a book? And what do you think was the key to the book's success?
So I've written lots of books, but I've never had the confidence to publish. So I have this. This is how I learn. Okay. So, and I've done this ever since before I had ADHD. So, well, before I knew I had
Yeah.
ADHD, right? Before I had a formal diagnosis. So I just assumed I was a bit quirky. So I've always learned, I've always never functioned well in an academic environment. I've never tested very well. And this again is because I would either hyper focus or I would shut off.
Right.
And in an academic environment, if you hyper focus too much, especially in a test environment, that can actually be a real downside. Like I remember my history GCSE, I love history. Most of the books that you see behind me are all history, and I should have aced that. But I remember opening it up and being so hyper focused on answering a 1 mark question that I never ended up finishing the test because I just ended up hyperfixating on it. So I've always learnt by teaching, right? So if ever I've sort of hyper focused on a subject, I would write about it, and this is called the Feynman method, right?
Yeah.
It's a means and a mechanism of learning something to retain it. You write about it with the intention of teaching it, and because you remember how you were teaching it, when you're asked about it, you can recite it. So throughout my life, right, and this is not hyperbole, I've written books on Lawrence of Arabia. I spent 2 years in the archives in Aldershot writing a chronology of the Second World War. I wrote a not really a book; it was more of a fancy pamphlet on the history of North Korea. I wrote a book on marketing when I was a personal trainer because I wanted to better understand how
Right.
to
Yeah.
market myself as a self-employed personal trainer. So I've actually written lots of books, but because I'm also dyslexic, these books also look like word salads to anyone that tries to read them. So a few years ago, when we were doing sort of educational live videos on TikTok, we used to do this thing where we would do educational boxes. So people would buy a box and then I would sort of narrate the items as we were putting them. They were kind of like mystery boxes, but people would sort of screen record it as I was giving a tutorial on the items I was putting it in. No, so Mike Brudenell, who is the editor for the book, this is kind of what caught his attention. Now, bearing in mind, Mike, in the entire time that he's been following us, which can be measured in years now, he's never bought anything from us, but he's just followed us for the educational content. Now, he offered a few years ago in the comment section, because I mentioned that I'd always wanted to properly write a book and have it be in print and it be physical. And I mentioned it, and he reached out and he said that I'll help you do it. Now, we kind of politely sort of disregarded it for a while because I didn't know Mike very well. And usually, when someone offers you something of this size and scale, you kind of assume it's an empty gesture. So I kind of ignored him for a little while. Not ignored, sort of politely. Oh, that's really lovely of you. And then when he kept asking, I started to take him more seriously. And I realized that he'd done it with previous books. And I saw some of the previous books that he'd helped edit, and they looked great. And then we just started collaborating. So the book was written about 3 hours a day, three, maybe 4 hours a day, most of which on a treadmill over the period of about 2 years. So I would send Mike something that was just horrifically verbose, and he would sort of whittle it down to something that was actually comprehensible, right? And there was just about 2 years of this. We wanted to do it in about 18 months. We had to keep delaying it because we had to keep fact checking it. And then it went out for third party review because I was so terrified that I know because I'm always very conscious of the fact that I'm self-educated. I now take pride in it, but I used to be very ashamed of it. The fact that I don't have qualifications, I've kind of matured into taking pride in that. But when I was writing the book, I was riddled with anxiety that I was going to publish this thing and it was going to be in the public domain. People, human beings, were going to be able to open it. In some situations, highly qualified people, and they were just going to tear it to pieces. And I thought
Yeah.
it would end up being a PR nightmare. So we spent we must have gone through it 4 times, and going through a 360-page book methodically 4 times takes months and months each time. It passed through multiple different experts just to make sure that everything was correct. But the book itself was an extension of me trying to understand the subject better. I think even when I was
Yeah.
writing it, I didn't feel like it was ever going to really manifest on paper. I had that sort of that self-deprecating doubt that it was never really going to happen. It was just this thing that was happening in my mind. But yeah, and now it exists, and it's been overworked. The reviews on it have been universally popular, which is great. I'm very proud of it.
And the sales have been great as well. So that's kind of how it's great to have a product that you're happy with in and of yourself, but it's also amazing when other people kind of share that pride and share that joy with you. So congratulations on that. And it
Thank
is a
you. I really
really
appreciate that.
fantastic book.
Thank
So
you.
that's the end of my chunky questions. You can sigh a breath of relief. But
Oh,
I
just
do have
two of
some
them.
fun quick fire questions for you.
Go
The
on then.
first one is, do you talk to your rocks?
Do I talk to my rocks? No, I don't talk to my rocks. I don't. I admire my rocks. I remember when we first during COVID, when we were kicked out of the shopping centre because obviously it was bubonic plague, so everyone got kicked out, and so we had to start trading from home. So we had to throw together sort of like loads of IKEA cabinets. They're different to these ones. These are new, but I remember it was the first time we'd internally lit cabinets, and it looked really beautiful, right? And I remember I used to sneak out of bed in the middle of the night, long after Danielle had gone to sleep, and I would come down here into this room and I would just turn the lights on and I would just stare at the cabinets. And sometimes I would do this multiple times a night. I would just come downstairs to admire it. And it was a bit of an odd fixation that I had, which I still do occasionally with these. I'll come downstairs. But the stuff that we have here now, it's not inventory. This is all personal collection. But I'll still come down in the middle of the night and I'll still switch the lights on and just admire it. I don't talk to them because I'm not insane.
No, I think I am insane, and I definitely talk to my rocks, and my partner catches me doing it every now and then. My second quickfire question is: you're stuck on a remote island, and you can only have access to three minerals to help get you out. What are you going to pick?
To get me out, all right. Can it be a rock?
Yes, yeah, yeah, yeah. You
All
can have
right, all
rocks
right.
as well.
All right. I'm going with pumice. Right, I'm going with pumice. It's vesicular rock which floats. So I think this is a good
Yes,
starting
yes.
point. So what can I use? So we want a very what's a nice robust material that I can use as a mast. Or let's use a very large aquamarine. All right, so it's a fairly. Oh, is that going to work as a mast?
It will
We'll,
look
we'll, we'll,
nice
we'll
at
work with it.
least.
I'll make it work. I'll make it work. So we're using we've got a flotilla device made of pumice or pumice. Insert your preferred pronunciation. With a mast made of aquamarine. we need to work out how we're going to use this, what we're going to use as a sail. So I've kind of anthropomorphized you onto this island with me as well. Um, what can we use as a sail? What's a sheet? There's maybe some gypsum. We get like
Oh yeah, 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 yeah.
some gypsum, like a big broad sheet of satin
Yeah,
spar.
that'll push the water back quite
Yeah.
well, I think.
Oh,
Yeah.
I need oars. Oars would have been more helpful, I think, wouldn't they? Okay, as opposed to my big sheet of gypsum. But yeah, and I need some kind of Wilson character, maybe a big Indian garnet, which I can draw a face on and then lose out at sea.
Put it at the top.
Garnet!
Love it. Absolutely love it. And my final quickfire question is Danielle says, Luke, you're allowed to remortgage the house and you can buy any mineral specimen of your dreams. What's it going to be?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I don't really covet stuff, if I'm honest with you. I
Yeah.
mean, I get asked, Danielle and I have always had this attitude where we've kind of recycled things. I mean, we wouldn't be where we are now if we hadn't had this attitude of sort of rinse and repeat. So would anything that I would buy, I would admire it for X amount of time and then probably sell it with the preconceived notion that I could get something better. So it's a difficult question to answer for me, really. Maybe if I could get the Dom Pedro aquamarine out of the Smithsonian, I think that
Oh,
might be.
yeah.
I think it's going to cost more. I mean, bearing in mind this is a council house, full disclosure. So me remortgaging this is going to be quite tricky. So I'm not quite sure what I would get for it. But in a theoretical universe, hypothetical universe where I can actually remortgage this and I could afford the Dom Pedro aquamarine, I think that's probably what I'd go for.
It's a great choice. It's a great choice.
Yeah,
I think that would
great
put a target
specimen,
on your
potential
back,
weapon.
probably. But
So again,
it would put a target on your back, probably. But
probably that's fine. I mean, considering some of the things I say online, I'm fairly sure there's quite a big target on my back anyway.
well, you know what? I also go to the gym, so I'm happy to be employed as your personal bodyguard if you need.
I would love that. I'm going to buy you some really intense sunglasses as well.
Yeah,
Maybe
yeah.
we'll get you fitted for an awesome suit. That would be cool.
Wicked. So it's not quite as much time as I'd hoped for questions from everyone else, but I'm gonna have a quick look through the chat to see if anyone did have questions. This is where I need like a helpful little assistant who could have done this for me, which unfortunately I don't have. But if anyone's got questions for Luke, feel free to drop them in the chat. Just be mindful that we are recording this session, so if you want me to ask your question, then let me know. But has anyone got any questions for Luke? Now's your chance. Ask him anything
Within reason.
within reason, within kind of British sensibilities, please.
Yeah. Oh no, I have no. You can ask me whatever you like. I'm fairly open book. I don't think I'm regarded as being someone that has much of a filter. So you can
Well,
ask me
yeah,
whatever you
I
like.
hope we get more of that at Munich. It's definitely at the beer hall.
Yeah, so we're going on Friday, aren't we? We're going to go and have
Yeah.
some beers on Friday, and I think Sean Mahoney's going to be there. Do you know Sean?
No, I don't.
Oh, Sean's great. I'll introduce you to Sean. He's just the best character. He's one of my favorite people in the whole industry. He's one of those sort of eccentric characters that you find in the industry that just loves what he does. He's a sort of meteoritics enthusiast, and I just
Nice.
love it. He's super eccentric, but that's what I love about him.
So you've got a couple of questions in the chat.
Go
So
ahead.
we'll end with these two. So what's your favorite mineral and why?
Fluorite, because that's what Danielle tells me to like, and I understand the hierarchy of our relationship, so I do as I'm told. No, I love fluorite. I think it's got a great diversity to it. There's an essence of patriotism to it as well, because where we are highly regarded in sort of the fluorite world as having some quite remarkable fluorites, and I'm inclined to agree with that. There's a beauty to it, and there's this diversity to it which is magnificent, and also this almost magnificent symmetry to it as well,
Yeah.
which is sort of like an absolute punch in the face to anyone that says that God doesn't design in straight lines.
It's one of those minerals that really gets you thinking like this can't be natural. Like,
Yeah.
no, the nature did not form a perfect cube like that, actually.
I love having that conversation with people about pyrite in the shop. They'll see
Yeah.
sort of like a Navajo pyrite and they'll be like, oh, wow, that's really nicely carved. I'm like, nobody carved that.
And another question we've got is what's your favorite part about having the shop?
Um, it, I'll word this. Um, in a way that's PC. I love children's reaction to it.
Yeah.
I love I am if I hadn't done this, I would have become a teacher. I've always wanted to teach. I've always had this compulsion to teach. Maybe it's an extension of show and tell, and I love. There's a young boy called Max who comes into the shop, and he is. I don't think he's going to mind me telling this story because I conferenced this with his granddad. I was going to write an essay about it. So he comes into the shop. He now wants to be a geologist. He's in the shop all the time, and he's remembering things that I'm talking to. And I spend quite a lot of time. I spend as much time with children as I possibly can. I'll get down to eye level with them. I don't like that sort of like when you've got really tall adult, really small
Yeah, the
child, get down
hierarchy.
to eye level, make eye contact with them, be endearing with them, ask them what their name is, be a human being as opposed to this sort of towering figure. I'll try and spend a great deal of time with children when they're in the shop, and Max is a fantastic example of this. And now he wants to be a geologist. And I've got lots of children that are like, I want to be a geologist, or I want to work with minerals, or I've had children say, I want to do what you do. And that means the world to me. And that is addictive. There is nothing that is more intoxicating than having a child say that you've inspired them to do something that before they came into your shop, they hadn't even considered. It wasn't even on their radar. That is the most intoxicating thing in the world.
Yeah, and it's brilliant that we've got people like yourself, and it's what we're trying to do at Next Gen Mineral Collectors around really supporting and creating that next generation of collectors in what is truthfully an aging hobby. I think we will all agree. Um,
Oh, I don't know about that. I think there's hope. I think there's hope for. I think it's a case of speaking to them in a language that they're fluent in. I think
yeah.
that the problem with the industry is it's sort of academics talking to academics in a language that most people feel precluded from because they don't speak it. If we can communicate things in a dry, accessible, and for the love of God, enthusiastic way, we this doesn't need to be a dying hobby. We can have an entire new generation of people who love what is actually a very important subject.
Yeah, I completely agree. And what a perfect place to end. So I'm just going to say, Luke, thank you so much. It was a real pleasure speaking to you this evening. And I'm really, really looking forward to our time in Munich. And everyone in the audience, thank you so much for coming. Thank you for gracing us with your presence. And yeah, it was really great to have you all. Our next session is going to be on the 23rd of November. Yes, that is correct. 23rd of November. We're having Jessie Fisher come back to do a talk for us on the Rogerly mine. So watch out for that. Follow us on Instagram to get the sign up link to that talk. But yeah, Luke, it was amazing. Thank you so much.
Fantastic. Auf Wiedersehen. I've thoroughly enjoyed talking to you, and thank you everyone for watching. It's been great.
Cheers. Catch you soon.
Bye bye.
Bye, everyone.